Now, to describe Max Blumenthal as an author and journalist and editor is like saying Ronaldo is a footballer. Yeah, he's a footballer, but he's the greatest footballer. And Max Blumenthal is the greatest breaker of stories over these last years, stories that the powerful didn't want you to know. That's why he gets the brickbats. But along with the brickbats comes the respect and admiration of millions of people around the world. People were talking to me in Caracas just yesterday about Max Blumenthal and the Grey Zone News, and so they should. And you should all follow the Grey Zone. Max, it's a big, big, big story, this California fires. I spoke with our friend Garland Nixon about it earlier. So there's not much more for us on this show to say about the fires. But I do think there's more to say about the ownership of the water resources of California by not just individuals, but individuals who funnel California's money that they get from owning the water resources to starving the Palestinian people of water in the occupied territories. This story of these fires has so many quirks to it. You'd almost think there was a divine hand at work in the situation there. What can you tell us about the Resnicks?
Well, first of all, thanks for the generous introduction. I hope I can live up to all that.
Sure.
And, sorry if I seem a little ruddier than usual. Just came from a long walk in the snow here in D.C. where we actually have water. I lived in L.A. for several years. And when I left, on the day I left, the city was actually surrounded in wildfires. I remember getting an infection, just feeling like the smoke was hanging thick over the city, like the city was uninhabitable. And that's part of the problem here, is that the city has grown far beyond its natural potential. Many of the people who are being impacted by the fire, working class, I have close friends who lost their homes, but also extremely rich people like the genocidal fanatic James Woods, who's now complaining about price gouging because his neighbors were paying an $18,000 lease for a home. Their home was burned down, and now they're being asked for $30,000. These are the problems that some of the rich are facing in the Palisades. James Wood, someone who has celebrated the destruction of homes, liquidation of entire families in Gaza, and he's not backing down on that. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. You are referencing the Resnick family, who own enormous amounts of land in the Central Valley of California. Now, if you have ever driven up the 5 highway from Los Angeles to San Francisco, that's the breadbasket of America. And pistachios are the cash crop from that area that takes up the most water. We're talking about thousands and thousands of gallons just to produce one bag of wonderful pistachios, which is the company owned by the Resnick family. Now, one of the interesting things about the Resnick family is that they supported sanctions on Iran, and I believe they donated to the main think tank in Washington, which is like an Israeli front group called the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which lobbied for sanctions on Iran. Mark Dubowitz, their CEO, has designed the sanctions on Iran. Now, why would they be interested? Maybe they're ideologically Zionist, but there's another aspect to it. Iran produces the best sanctions, and they're basically killing the competition through the sanctioning of Iran and cornering the market so that California pistachios are the only thing on the supermarket table. And they own not just the water that is irrigated from under the ground, that deprives smaller farmers and just average people in California of water. They also own Fiji Water, the Fiji Bottled Water Company, and they've backed up a military junta which allows them to offload fresh water from Fiji onto a tanker that they then ship to wealthy people in the West. So it's a pretty disturbing story. I mean, what we're seeing through the fires, what we see through every natural disaster or industrial disaster in the U.S. now, whether it's East Palestine, Ohio, or Lahaina, Hawaii, which is we lift the mask and see the inequality in this oligarchy that we live in.
Yes, I mean, it's almost karmic, the connections that you can make. But it has surely done for, in any sane polity, the policy of sending hundreds of billions of dollars abroad, whilst your own fire hydrants don't have any water. Surely somebody somewhere is, adding 2 and 2 and coming up with 4. If we hadn't sent all that money overseas, maybe we wouldn't have so many disasters and the disastrous end result of natural problems that occur, floods and so on. We wouldn't be short of money to help the people afflicted by these disasters if we weren't spending it all in Ukraine or sending it to Israel.
I mean, LA is a special case here, and there's a huge debate in the city over whether the fire department had enough money and whether it would have made a difference. And some of my friends in LA are saying, I'm not there right now, so I can't give you the best expertise or analysis from the ground on this. But they're saying, 4 massive wildfires at once in the interior of the city with 80 to 100 mile per hour Santa Ana winds. What could anyone have done against that? I mean, the city was always prepared for one massive wildfire, and it usually hits in the more outer hills. But there has been a debate over whether the fire department had enough money because Mayor Karen Bass increased the police department budget, the LAPD department budget. It was a political move. It was a backlash against Black Lives Matter and the defund the police campaign. And it was also partly a response to a lot of petty crime that's been happening because LA gentrified its Skid Row area downtown and started moving this massive homeless population, which was like just a city within a city, into other areas like Echo Park, where like yuppies live. And people got upset with people who are mentally ill carrying out, small scale property crimes, defecating on the corner. The police budget went up. The fire department budget went slightly down. I see the right wing trying to blame this all on DEI because they have like a lesbian fire department fire chief. I mean, that would be like me blaming the fact that the Washington Commanders, our NFL team, has male cheerleaders now for the fact that they won't win the playoff game tonight. It just doesn't really add up for me. However, I mean, there is a reality now in LA and across the country. We're seeing more and more of these kinds of massive natural disasters. It's partly just a lack of municipal planning. And what would be wrong with reallocating, first of all, some of the money being sent to Ukraine? $175 billion has been sent to Ukraine. Some of it should be sent to allow for planning for future natural disasters in the U.S. Number 2, all people below a certain income level in Los Angeles who lost their homes. A friend of mine lost her home and her art archive, which was her entire business. She lost everything because it was just in her small home. So many people, or small business people, lost everything like that. Should have their home rebuilt for free instead of reallocating that money to AI murder warlords like Peter Thiel and Parker Luckey and Mark Andreessen and this AI cartel, which is going to get basically no bid defense contracts to do targeting, not just in Ukraine, but in Gaza. And we can consider the words of none other than Vladimir Zelensky to Lex Friedman in this clownish interview he gave, this podcast interview Zelensky gave in English, where he complained that the $175 billion never actually reached Ukraine. This is Zelensky saying it. He said half of it just went back to these warlord contractors in the U.S., these white-collar, genocidal, soft-handed, eccentric, racist maniacs And if that money is just being given back to our upper class, this is the biggest money laundering scheme we've ever seen. The money should be immediately reallocated to Lahaina, to LA, and to rebuild this country and plan for the future, because this won't be the last kind of disaster we see like this.
Now, Max, I've just been in Venezuela, albeit fleetingly, but when I got there, I discovered that the US has already recognized someone else, not Juan Guaido, a much older gentleman who looked as infirm as Joe Biden, in mentally at least. And I discovered that your government has placed a $25 million bounty on the head of the president, recognized by the armed forces in Venezuela, by the courts in Venezuela, by the majority of governments in the world, many of whom were standing with me at the inauguration. But the US has appointed someone else as the president of Venezuela, and having taken the $10 million reward away from the ISIS al-Qaeda chief in Damascus, they've now reallocated that money to Maduro. I mean, where do you even start with that kind of hubris?
Well, it's not just hubris, it's deeply cynical, and it highlights how self-serving the Biden gang has been. Okay, they just lifted a $20 million bounty from former ISIS deputy founder and founder of Syria's al-Qaeda chapter, Mohammed Jolani, who's now rebranded as Ahmed al-Sharaa, now that he is part of the ISIS, or Islamic State in Suits, administration in Damascus, which the U.S. has de facto recognized because they've agreed to treat the Israeli occupation down in the Syrian Golan with kid gloves or no gloves at all, and aren't challenging the U.S. occupation of northeastern Syria, including its oil fields. Now that money's freed up, so now they're putting the bounty on Nicolas Maduro's head, someone who has never been involved in terrorism, has faced false charges of drug trafficking from William Barr, who's in his previous incarnation before being Trump's attorney general, helped write the pardons for the Iran-Contra felons in the Reagan administration, someone who came up in the CIA. And what is the Biden administration doing on its way out by adding a new layer of sanctions on Maduro and basically inviting any mercenary or terrorist or cartel from Colombia to come kill him? One thing they're doing is they're trying to prevent the Trump administration from making a deal with Venezuela to lower the cost of oil in America. And at the same time that the Biden administration did this, they put sanctions on Russia's so-called ghost fleet, basically any ship that is carrying Russian oil that isn't insured in the UK. What is that going to do? That's going to raise the prices of oil for sure, because the US is sanctioning Venezuelan and Iranian oil, and we're still getting oil and gas from Russia. So it will increase oil prices under Trump, which will then have a knock-on effect of increasing inflation. And then the Democrats will come in and say, Trump wrecked the economy, vote for us in the midterms. And if Trump tries to go to Venezuela and say, hey, let's make a deal, do some power sharing agreement, something, can we work this out? Because Trump had previously hinted at wanting to do that while Elliot Abrams and John Bolton were trying to run a coup. Remember, he referred to Maduro as a tough cookie and said he's not going anywhere, and they freaked out and tried to corner Trump. So if Trump tries to do a deal allowing Venezuelan crude to be refined in Texas, which would be a great arrangement for Americans, it's going to be that much harder to do, because he first has to lift the bounty from Maduro, and he'll be attacked from within his own base and by his own Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So what I'm saying is the Biden administration has injected a poison pill into the U.S. economy for the sole purpose of undercutting Trump. It's pure political pettiness at the price of the pocketbook of Americans.
And ditto the latest tranche of money to Ukraine, surely, and the permissions to fire long-range rockets into people's homes inside Russia. All of these are poison pills, aren't they, to try and force Trump, maybe he doesn't need forced in some regards, but to try and force Trump to effectively continue the discredited foreign policy of President Biden.
Yeah, for sure. And while they're constantly daring Putin and declaring that Putin's just bluffing, which is what they said from 2014 on until reality came crashing through and Putin invaded. Now the Biden administration is trying to prevent Trump from cutting a deal to end this war, or in the words of Vice President J.D. Vance, to just simply end the killing of Ukrainians. And you'll notice if you're in the U.S., there's just this flood of media from Biden-friendly publications, first touting the supposed successes of the Ukrainians. Like the New York Times Magazine last week was all about the Ukrainian new strategy of suicide drones and how it's terrorizing the Russians. Like, yeah, they can actually win this, and they're refining modern warfare. And then there's this triumphalism. Yeah, actually right next to me. This is the cover of Foreign Affairs. This is the official journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is, the home to the foreign policy elite in the U.S. and Wall Street's de facto think tank. And the headline is "The Strange Triumph of a Broken America." America is polarized. It's socially doing terrible. Many Americans are angry. They don't trust their government. But the Biden foreign policy has worked. It broke Syria. China's economy is weakened. Russia is being ground down in Ukraine, and the Russian ruble is getting weaker against the dollar. It's the way that they see the world is so cynical and so Manichaean. But they actually believe, this was also transmitted to the viewers of CNN through Fareed Zakaria before interviewing NSC Director Jake Sullivan, that the Biden administration has scored this great victory against multipolarism and against these rising new powers and secured the position of the dollar, and that perhaps if Trump does the right thing and he just follows their lead, the unipolar order will actually be restored. And that is the fantasy that they're trying to sell. Not average Americans. They don't care what average Americans think. They're trying to sell this to the foreign policy elite, the lanyards who make all the decisions and decide where all of our money goes.
Now, finally, Max, you know me. I'm always looking for a silver lining in any cloud. And when I heard that Netanyahu was now not coming to Washington for the inauguration, and that reportedly one of the reasons is that Trump had indirectly insulted him by retweeting Jeffrey Sachs' rather dark and damning description of Netanyahu. I thought, is there a change here? Is there a silver lining in the cloud, which was a dark one, about Trump's dependence on the Adelsons and other big money Israel supporters in the U.S.? Can you shed any light on this?
Yeah, I don't know if this is me shedding light. It's me speculating. But I don't think Netanyahu would have reacted in such a rash way to what could have been an underhanded insult, given that he hated Barack Obama, but he would constantly come to Washington, and then he would give Obama the business in public and show who's really in charge. And Netanyahu has a massive card to play against Trump in the form of Miriam Adelson and her $100 million, which will also be deployed during the midterm elections coming up in just 2 years. So I don't think that is it. Also, in the Jeffrey Sachs interview, he attacked Obama over Syria. So Trump might have just heard that he attacked Obama and put it up. We don't know. One thing we should be thinking about, though, is Netanyahu's health. He just underwent a major operation, a prostate operation. It was said to be a urinary tract infection, but you don't get your prostate, as far as I know. Maybe I'm not like the leading expert on prostate health because I'm only 47, but you don't get your prostate removed for a urinary tract infection. And so it could be that Netanyahu is hiding something like cancer or a more serious health condition. And that's why he didn't come. He may not have recovered well from the operation, but Netanyahu, if he's not going to be there forever. So Netanyahu, the martyr, would actually be more valuable to his own cause than Netanyahu leaving office and then facing all sorts of prosecutions, October 7th, investigations. But I think Netanyahu's position is secure for the Trump administration, at least his agenda, which is driving towards regional war. And I do know that that is something that Trump doesn't want at the beginning of his term. Trump doesn't want an open-ended conflict with Iran, and I don't think the Iranians want it either. But Netanyahu does not want, it seems clear to me, he does not want the hostages to come out on anyone's terms but his own. And as long as the hostages and captives are in Gaza, then he has all the ability he needs to continue pushing for the regional war, which is propping up his reign of terror.